So when you do a budget, you got to figure out first and foremost figure out the past. So all of a sudden you got to assess the past. Okay, well, what was my revenue in different months? What was my expenditure? How did the past go? What went well? And when you do a budget, you need to you can start anywhere, but let's say you start at the top line. You go, okay, what is going to be my revenue goal?
We're all part of this whole money game. This whole...
Welcome back to another episode of Beers and Business. I'm Abe Dearmer, CEO of Appsembler.
And I'm Andrew Martin, CEO of Teamgate CRM. And today we have a special guest. It's been a little while since we've had a special guest. And I'm happy to introduce Mr. Sevan Tuna, who is the managing director of Alexander Spencer and, of course, the host of the Bottom Line podcast, which is where we met many months ago.
It's a bit of a backstory to this one too.
Yeah, had me on my first ever podcast appearance. You know, I was just as terrified back then as I generally am these days jumping on a podcast. So Sevan warmed me into the process. So I appreciate it. And now we've flipped the script and he's now on our podcast. So
thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be on today. And I'm glad I was an inspiration to you, Andrew. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, for sure. It should be a good one and a very interesting topic, I think, for a lot of our listeners who are very similar, I guess, to the audience that you serve, Sevan, in your podcast. So we speak to a lot of small businesses, a lot of founders, a lot of startups, especially in Australia as well. So your services and your knowledge will be very, very interesting, I think, to many of the listeners. So
yeah, we're going to be talking all things. You know, tax time has just been for a lot of people. Budgeting, bookkeeping. We'll stick to Sevan's areas of expertise for the podcast and give some people probably a bit more in-depth knowledge than what Andrew and I have been able to deliver when we talked about these subjects, especially. So excited for this one. But sure. I guess let's crack it off with our beer review. It wouldn't be a Beers and Business podcast without a beer review. I think it's just Andrew and I with the beers. That's all right. Sevan can watch.
What have we got today, guys?
Not everyone likes to drink at 10 a.m. in the morning, Abe. Like us.
Are you sure? My day started at 2 a.m. So for me, it's like 5 p.m. right? Yeah, probably even later than that. Today, so I've been drinking Devil's Hollow, which is a brewery just in Dubbo, Sevan, and I got the XPA, and this is called The Commotion. And I was reading the story before, and it's pretty interesting. Geary is actually in between where I live and Dubbo. And the story goes, Geary might seem quiet, but don't be fooled. Our brewer and local tells of the explosive Geary crossing loop collision of 1963 when a high-speed Sydney-bound mail train collided with a goods train waiting at the station, causing a massive derailment. Miraculously, there were no fatalities and only 19 passengers injured. However, the aftermath was epic, closing the track for 3 days, and both locomotives were destroyed, never to return to service after the crash. What a commotion. There you go, The Commotion.
Wow.
There you go. Story behind it.
They've all got it back. So this is an XPA. It's a bit darker. Not really too much of a fan of an XPA usually. But this one has a nice bitterness and fruity combination. So liking that one. Well done again, Devil's Hollow. I've only ever had one bad beer, and that was... did you review that one, Andrew? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a shock.
But being pretty good picks.
Was that bad beer an Australian beer or what?
It was, but it was a sour. I think it was a guava sour or something. So it was.
Yeah.
Beer is a loose topic when we refer to that one. So
I'm not even sure why you picked that one to start with.
I think we'll do another early podcast.
Your Queensland cans, mate.
And speaking of Queensland cans, here we are. We're back with another. Where's my camera?
Your mates.
Queensland lager. So this is the one I've been trying to get my hands on for a while. So I've been through all of the entire range of your mates across the podcast, and the Queensland lager was only recently released, and it was sold out across Australia, so I couldn't get any. So I finally got my hands on some. So we're going to try it out today. Low carb.
Perfect,
lager,
mate.
which perfect for people
that goes
like
with your running life.
Trying to maintain that six-pack that I had when I was 16. Very light looking colour. We'll just let that settle for a second.
You did another shocking pour, didn't you?
But the only first feedback I've got is, why is the Queensland can in blue when you released it around State of Origin
blue.
time?
It's not really blue. It's like a tropical color, mate.
It's more blue than maroon, but very light, very light. There's your color.
Oh yeah, it's looking good, mate.
It's nice, good, refreshing beer. I think that would go down probably too well on a hot day, and you'd go through a fair few of them pretty quick. So no description for this one. I think it was just released as the beer for Queenslanders, brewed by Queenslanders for Queenslanders. There you go. That's all you need for the.
That's probably
backstory.
why it's available now, mate.
Yeah, a lot of sad
State of Origin
Queenslanders.
It's
A lot of
nice
sad
and,
Queenslanders.
it's nice and warm in Queensland. You'd be hitting the beers all right. We all year round. We probably. I'm not a huge beer drinker, but in winter it probably doesn't get as much playtime as it should.
Yeah, for sure. And it's been cold. It's been cold. I think it's been cold across Australia at the moment. There's been a lot of snow down south. I saw that recently, but we hit. I sent Abe a message the other day because I like to whinge to him about my categorization of cold. But we hit 1.6 degrees. I think it was Monday morning, which is the coldest day on the Sunshine Coast in 12 years. So
I'm sitting at -3.
I think Abe was about -4, but so I won't complain too much. I've got a heater. Keeps me nice and warm.
What's your go-to drink, Sevan?
Look, I like wine, whiskey, and beer. I used to love a red wine, a Shiraz, but my wife's not a drinker. So, I'm normally a happy drinker. So if I'm in a good mood, I've had a good day, I'll have a drink. If I've had a bad day, I try to stay away from it, just to use drinking for celebration. But if I'd open a bottle of red wine and my wife doesn't drink it, you'd have a couple of glasses. Well, what happens? You either got to finish it and you end
Not
up...
everyone has our mentality, Andrew.
No, we can't finish it. It ends up going in the sink. If I'm not having one the next day, it ends up being a lot of a waste. I got invited to a whiskey tasting about 5 years ago. And I'm not a real huge whiskey drinker, and I knew it was going to be neat, and I don't really cannot drink it neat. And I reluctantly went to this with a mate of mine, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was awesome.
Got you hooked.
And what happened? I wasted a bottle of wine. I'm like, hold on, why did I have the bottle of wine? I could have just had whiskey, little snip, put a cork back, and we're all good, no waste. And now I've gotten into that. And with whiskey, sometimes you can have like 15 mil, quick sip, and you're done. You don't need to. I feel like with wine, it's a process of drinking it. I do like a beer. We have when it's hot and the kids are in the pool, I don't mind cracking open a beer. So I don't. But I noticed that if you drank your beer in a glass, I have to have my beer in a glass. There's something about drinking beer in a beer cup. I can do anything else, but I do like that. Out of a can and a bottle, it's just not the same. So yeah, I'm not. I'll drink anything really, but I've really gotten pretty attached to whiskey at the moment.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I absolutely hate whiskey. I can't.
You're a gin man.
I've been to those tastes. Yeah, I can drink gin straight on the rocks. I can drink that neat.
Yeah.
And love a bottle of red wine. Nothing better than that. Sitting in front of the fire with a bottle of red. But that's like definitely a winter drink and something that you sit down and enjoy rather than, as you said, a quick 15 mil of whiskey and stuff like that. But yeah, I can drink gin straight, but whiskey, not for me.
Fair enough.
Not for me. But all credit to you.
I went through a phase where I tried to, and I was buying expensive whiskey, thinking, if I buy more expensive whiskey, it'll be easier to drink straight. But unfortunately, it wasn't. So, but there's an art to it. Like there's so many different ways to drink it straight, and they talk. There's tips and there's some articles out there for you, Abe, for drinking whiskeys for beginners. And they'll tell you like hold your breath, don't breathe out of your nose.
If you have to do that, it's like. It's like all those people that go on a diet and eat the fake cookies, and it's like, man, probably just have the cookie, hey? Like, if you want to go through all that effort, like, people who go to all the effort to replicate things that they're restricting themselves from, it's like, man, maybe we should just have it, hey? Like holding your breath when you're drinking whiskey, maybe just give it a miss.
Yeah, for sure. Let's
learning of the week.
Let's jump into it. Yeah, we've got some stuff to cover with Sevan, so we'll go through our normal learning of the week, quote of the week, and who's up first? Me. All right, so my learning of the week is
Good work,
overthinking. Mate. Yeah, well read. Overthinking and waiting for the perfect time or solution are the biggest killers of progress. So I guess to give context for that, this could be applied to anything, really. If you've got signs and symptoms of bad things in your budgeting, in your books, waiting and not addressing it immediately could be an issue. But In my case, it's the launch of the Teamgate community. So obviously we've got a customer base that's very hands-on. We do a lot of work with those customers. So we had a need for a community, which we've just launched. That launch was delayed because the CEO is a perfectionist and wanted everything to be perfect before we launched, and it just continued to get delayed. But at the end of the day, the signal that we got from the customers is they just wanted somewhere to network, somewhere that they could access, people like me or my team, but also other people using the CRM, somewhere they could go and ask for advice, and somewhere that they could jump on events where, we're going through things like how to best use the system and things like that. So, rather than perfecting all the content, just launch it. Obviously there's a planning process and there'll be a state that you want to get to. But if that timeline is coming up and you're going to have to keep delaying, just take that first step and launch and see what your customer's reaction is, which ours has been positive so far. So yeah, try not to be a perfectionist where you can. Something that I continue to work on in myself. And that's my learning of the week.
That was a bit of a self handshake there. I'm a perfectionist. I need to get over myself.
It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. It's not a good thing.
But yeah, don't let great get in the way of good is one thing that I like to say to people is you're better off launching something now than waiting 6 months and you've lost your chance or lost all that time. So I think that's definitely an important piece. My one is about digital marketing. So it's becoming more and more difficult to be able to track clicks, where the customer has come from, attribution. And so it's having a shift in the market is moving from tracking clicks to understanding what's influencing customers and buyer behavior more. So shift in, the platform dynamics has driven this, such as Apple hiding all that data, becoming increasingly difficult for Google to track it across platforms. Privacy and tracking limitations, so that third-party cookie limitation that came in recently, was it 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, really starting to show its effect on the market. And so what they're focusing on now is an emphasis on influence over direct attribution. So they're really trying to focus on how the buyer will move through their journey as opposed to, we've got to increase clicks on this particular site or increase clicks on this blog. So it's thinking about the process that your buyer takes. So what I would say is don't be fooled by people who promise you an abundance of clicks or impressions when they offer you marketing campaigns, because generally it's too good to be true and it probably isn't going to result in any results anyway. So just think about how your people buy is the key bit.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at a lot of those marketing and paid marketing, what do you call them? Consultants, I guess, or services. A lot of it's around spend. And they take a percentage of what you spend. So the more you spend, the more they make. So of course they want you to spend more on those services. So
whenever you get like a Google Ads consultant that says, well, we charge you 10% of your spend on Google Ads as our fee, just know that they're going to continuously try to get you to spend more and rip you off.
Yeah, for sure. Sevan, we don't want to put you under the pump. Do you have anything you want to share with us before we move on?
Oh, not really. The thing for me, sort of, that came out of our stuff in our business this week was really just evolving the way you do things. So in our industry, in the accounting industry, from a tax perspective, our accounting firm, the tax firm, we get to do the tax returns every year again. So we're about to start our season. We're in the month of July, so we get to do FY24 tax returns and financials for our clients. We don't do just that for our clients, but what we learned is continual improvement. This time of the year for us is challenging status quo, challenging the way we do things and how we're going to do things differently. So that's not just in customer experience or internal processes, but what we've talked about is how we communicate as leaders. So we've been heavily talking about, because we've got the partnership group, the management group, and then sort of the rest of the staff at different levels. But the management group, our managers that run our teams, and the partnership group have had difficulties over the last 12 months around how we communicate. So we've had a lot of conversations around best practice, communication, transparency, and connections. Yeah, that's been a little bit of what we've been working on this last probably month, but it's all come to a bit of a pointy head this week, and we had some really interesting conversations.
Yeah, and sometimes those hard conversations are necessary to move forward. And one thing that really interests me with that is that, tax time is sort of that once a year activity. When do you generally do your review of how things went? Because for us, Andrew and I, we generally have quarterly goals. We do an annual review of how the company went overall. But with something like that, where it's you do tax time and then you park it for another 12 months or probably 10 months, probably once you're finished with it, and then come back to it. Do you have a review period straight after tax time, or do you get together and say, okay, well, what can we do better?
It's a little bit like a football team. I'm based out of Melbourne, so a big AFL fan. So definitely we have an annual strategy. So like a football team, there's generally how we're going to approach the year, a game plan, an overarching way that we want to do things. But then what we do is we do little reviews and check-ins on a regular basis, a bit like after every game. Did we play well? What we tried to do, did it work? Did the other team tackle our strategies in a way that we weren't able to compete? So we have an overarching strategy, but on a regular basis, we'll review it. We try to stay as much to the course of what we set out and make small changes across the board unless things have gone completely wrong. But we do a massive review at the end, which normally happens around late April, early May, around that time. So we'll definitely do that kind of big review at that point in time. We encourage our staff to look for improvement all the time. So we use the word progress a lot. So are we progressing? Are we getting better? We're incremental. It doesn't have to be 10, 20%. If it's 1 or 2% every little bit here and there in a longer timeline, we generally get a big improvement from where we started and where we ended up.
Yeah, nice. And I guess to put it in a football sense, you sort of do, that quarter time review as you reach certain points within the game, and then do the film review, once you finish up. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. All right, let's get into quotes. Next one, I'll go first for the quotes. So, Sevan, I'm not sure if you're going to get put on the spot with the quotes here, but that's okay. So my quote is, get in the habit of constantly prioritizing and reprioritizing most. So this is by Frank Slootman. Sevan, if you haven't read Amp It Up by Frank Slootman, I'm a big fan. I plug it all the time. It's one of the best books for business leaders, I think, where you talk about progress. Literally, his book titled Amp It Up is all about how you can get that progress out of the team. So he's IPO'd 3 companies, took them from average to really great companies. So his message here is goals constantly change, priorities constantly change. So you need to be consistently reviewing those as you move forward.
Love it. Amp It Up. I'll have to write that down. I have not read that though, so definitely will go on my list.
It's on my top 5 books.
Awesome.
There you go. Top 5 books. What's mine? Mine is, well, if Sevan doesn't have one, I think this one will make him
for both of you.
Proud or not proud, one or the other way, one way or the other. But my quote is, a budget tells us what we can't afford, but it doesn't keep us from buying it. And that's by William Feather. You can look at this in 2 ways. You can look at it as my wife's spending on Afterpay when she wants to buy things outside of her budget. Or you can look at it from a business sense as well. Obviously, we do a budget at the start of the year. We review that each quarter or even each month when we reconcile the books. But, if you're budgeting out for the rest of the year and you've got a big conference planned like I do in November, do you have the money to spend there, or do you need to draw funds from somewhere else, or where can you reduce costs to actually achieve that? If there's a high, ROI, or that's an essential thing that you need to attend, or maybe you need to look at cutting costs elsewhere or coming up with other ways, whether it's through financing or drawing cash from some other source. So that's my quote of the week, which ties nicely into what we're going to talk about in the main segment of today's podcast, which will be budgeting, bookkeeping, and all things tax with the expert himself, Sevan. So before we jump into some of the questions we've got, Sevan, did you want to give just a brief background. Obviously, you and I are relatively familiar.
Did Sevan bring a quote? He might have brought a quote.
I just covered his quote.
I don't have a quote. I'm sorry. I have a little bit of a mantra that I've been using a fair bit. I heard
you can use a self quote if you want.
I don't. Yeah. I have someone that says borrow freely, apply uniquely. So I'm going to do that today. So I'm going to borrow a quote, and I don't know who said it. I heard it somewhere. It's not a real quote, but I've taken it, and it's choose courage over comfort. Something that we've been talking this last sort of 4 to 6 weeks as part of our review and what we want to do with the team. Accountants are very introverted, they're very shy, and they're numbers people. So a lot of them can at times be quite I don't want to say the word exactly scared, but find it challenging to get out of their comfort zone. So we've been using the word courage over comfort, and we say to them, always choose courage over comfort, and do at least one thing a day or one thing a week that makes you a little bit uncomfortable. And again, that will set you in the right path to progress. So I don't know if that's a quote, but it's a little bit of a belief that I have and how I sort of try to encourage the team.
No, it's great. That's perfect. Courage over comfort. Yeah, I think that is, a big thing, especially when you look at small businesses, is, taking the courage to make that first step, or, taking the courage to expand into something else, grow the business. A lot of small business owners get anxiety about growth, and, especially around hiring or buying a van for the business, or, another ute for the business and things like that. And it's like, well, do you need it? And if you do need it, and it's part of your expansion because you can't take on more work until you have it, then have the courage to move forward to it. And I think that's a big piece for small business owners.
Yeah, and I think growth also sometimes means letting go a little bit of control. If you're a small business and you're the CEO and you're the boss and you need to expand, it looks like hiring people. It looks like empowering other people to take on some of those responsibilities that you probably used to have, which a lot of people get very uncomfortable doing, which we've seen in our military careers, Abe. But awesome. Well, let's dive into the meat of it, which is what I was trying to do before Abe cut me off. But Sevan, I'm familiar with your background, but for the listeners and probably also for Abe, I'd love for you just to touch on your background, how you got into the position you're in now with Alexander Spencer, and what Alexander Spencer does as well, just so everyone's aware of that expertise, and then we'll dive into some good questions.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity again. So I am the managing director of an accountancy firm based out of Melbourne called Alexander Spencer. How I got here, it's a interesting journey. I was very fortunate. I didn't fall into this industry and so on. It was something that I've always wanted to be. It was in year 10. I was never good with language and never really good at writing, reading. I didn't really enjoy reading. I do now, but not back then. But numbers really resonated with me. And growing up, I started working at my uncle's Mexican restaurant. Back then you could hire, slave labor. It's probably about 11 years old. So 11, 12 years old, I started working at my uncle's restaurant on a Friday and a Saturday night. And I just loved the idea of business. So I really got into business. And then in year 10, we did a subject called social studies. And in that particular subject, taught you about alcohol, taught you about a bit about how law is made, just general topics of just, it was the most practical subject I did. And one section of it was, accounting, receipts, payments, what is money, what is a checkbook. Back then we had them and so on and so forth. And I'm like, whoa, this is how a business records their receipts, their payments. That's how they work out their profit. And I just loved it. It was year 10, and we had to then pick subjects in year 11 and 12. And obviously accounting was one of them. I picked accounting, legal studies, business management. I just loved those subjects and those things. And I knew I wanted to be an accountant. And I had this thing where I never thought accounting, and I don't know whether it was a perceived thing, was I never thought accounting was you go and work for Coca-Cola as an accountant or HP as an accountant. I thought accountants just did public practice accounting, which is what I do now. So that's what that's what I thought accounting was. So yeah, that was the path I took. I got into an accounting degree. But
how often do you see, an accountant that works for Coca-Cola, right? Like,
no,
you see accountants all the time on the street when you're walking past. You see accounting firms and things like that. But yeah, you never see the behind closed doors, and no one's out there shouting from the rooftops, like I'm an accountant for Coca-Cola.
You're 100% right. I never thought of it that way, but yeah. So yeah, I jumped into I got into the degree. I always wanted to do it, and I graduated high school in '96, finished uni in '99, and around that period, the market was really good, but 5 to 10 years prior in the early 90s, it was really hard to get a job for university graduates. And growing up, I would hear that a lot. So, and I heard, unless you had experience, you wouldn't get a job. So for my journey, I made sure I had experience. So I did, during my whole university career, I worked in public practice at different firms. Reached out to my dad's accountant, worked for them for 3 months, did stuff during uni and so on and so forth. So, but I got the job at Alexander Spencer in 1999 when I graduated as a graduate accountant, and I've been here ever since. So,
Man, that's amazing.
Yeah,
It's insane.
I am a loyal person. So, and became a partner when I was 30. So about 15 years ago. The practice has grown exponentially over that journey from when I started in 99 to today. And it was a general practice, what you would know as an accounting firm to be. Pretty much does, tax returns for business clients. That was our focus. We didn't really focus on, we're not like a H&R Block. I love leadership. I love people. I grew up playing sport as captain. So for me, being an owner of a business wasn't just about being able to grow the business. That's sort of like the winning the championship. But I love coaching. I love teaching. And being the boss, I guess, allows you to do that with freedom. You get to be the coach. You get to be the CEO or the chairman of the board. Whereas if you're an employer, you may have leadership roles, but you still always have someone to answer to. I've got this thing where I wanted to be top of the tree. And over the course of Alexander Spencer, we then grew the practice where we're going to talk about bookkeeping a fair bit today. We've got a bookkeeping division we brought on about 6 years ago. We felt that was important to our client base. So we have a business called the Outsourced Office, which is a bookkeeping business. We do general insurance with Wilson Wine Insurance Brokers. We help our clients with wealth, with AS Wealth Advisory, and also we help our clients with mortgages and finance. And we have a finance division called AS Mortgage Partners. So we're now more of a one-stop shop. A business client comes in and we provide them with a holistic service approach. So, and my role is to lead the accounting division.
Yeah, nice. And so that's pretty much what you're offering is a financial services across the board. So we talked about it on our budget podcast that we did a little while back, essentially how accountants generally do your tax and will, manage your accounts, but they're not going to be responsible for your budget. So they do historic data. They don't do future projections. And unless you hire someone specifically that is there for budgeting and bookkeeping, you're not going to get that service from someone. So I think it's really cool that you can sort of build out that holistic picture for the business owner that essentially is not like you and doesn't care about the numbers and just wants to know if they can buy something or if the business is actually doing well. More importantly, as Andrew said before, their wife's afterpay or husband's afterpay or whatever the case may be, right? Making sure that they can sustain that as they go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. That's really cool. And I mean, it says a lot about the workplace environment that you must be in, Sevan, to be working at the same location since 1999, was it?
Yeah, 99. Yep.
Yeah, that's nowadays especially that's completely crazy because you see people that switch jobs every year. Having a stint of that amount of time, you must be at a great place to work, and so that's a massive kudos to them, right?
Yeah, and I think some of that DNA early on, they were just the partners that I worked for at the time, who became my partners later, who it's evolved over time. The one thing that they did that I think I resonated with was that it was very conscious of family first, and and mental health wasn't talked about back in those days, but family first and your personal well-being was so much in the forefront. The organization, you just felt like it was your home, and you'd very quickly would come into the office and I didn't buy the desk or the computer or that, but it felt mine. Everything felt mine, and that's probably continued, and that's sort of that early DNA that we've approached. And And there was never a ceiling. Another thing that they did with when I started, that's continued, is there's never been a ceiling on anyone's growth or any prejudice around sex. It was all about your skills and how good you are, and how hard you wanted it and worked, and you got it. It was no holding anyone back. And that's why I stayed. And yeah, it's evolved to something quite unique.
Yeah, nice. That's great to hear, and I'm really pleased that you had that experience as well, because that's that can sometimes be rare for a lot of people to hit a winner like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Awesome. So I guess Andrew, unless you got any other ones, I put this question in here. So I listen to a lot of different podcasts that are out there, specifically, looking at the Chanticleer. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're the Chooks. Listen to those guys. Alan Collar forms a big part of my listening habits, and I listen to podcasts as well as the Beer and Business podcast, of course. Love listening to my own voice. But one thing that they keep talking about is, and I'm seeing it in the news starting to be, I think it's underreported how much small businesses are struggling at the moment. And I'd love to know from your perspective, because you see across a lot of different businesses and probably well across the information that's out there, what are you seeing in the market around small business? Everything I'm seeing says conditions are tough, but interested in your viewpoint.
Yeah, look, we're very, very fortunate that the client base we have is a really good client base, in the sense that majority of our clients are very successful and they do quite well. But generally across the board, there's a massive reduction in thinking of economic activity. So even if a business is doing well or not well, everyone is concerned about what they're spending, and they're concerned about the future. So in the good old days, you just did it. You hired people, you spent money on marketing, knowing that the future was bright. There was never this question about, what's the interest rates and the prices going up and blah, blah, blah. People just ran their businesses with a little bit of comfort and less fear. What we're seeing, even with the really successful ones, is the ones that had that ability to just go and grow. We talked about growth earlier. Go and buy those vans or upgrade the vans. They're not upgrading. They're maintaining. They're less reluctant. They're not pulling the trigger on that extra hire. They're saying, can we, find AI or other efficient processes, which I think all businesses should do. But they're very conscious now of what they are doing. In a market that is buoyant and doing well, you're free to make mistakes and you get away with it. I think people are now aware that you can't make mistakes and it may hurt. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of business owners really be conscious of that and being a little bit more strategic in their decision making.
Yeah, and I mean, the news that broke yesterday was Rex in administration, just another airline to take a hit. And I think I saw in the Australian, it was reported that there's been more business closures than in the GFC over the past financial year.
I have a reason for that, and I've been talking about this for a little while. The reason I believe that there's been more closures in the last 12 months is not because just of the economic activity. During COVID, the Australian government introduced, and the state governments introduced, various measures so that businesses couldn't liquidate. So you couldn't put a stat demand on a supplier, a creditor, a debtor that didn't pay you. The landlords had to provide all these benefits to tenants, whether you were really doing well or not doing well. So, and there was all this stimulus. So in every year, whether there's good times or bad times, there's a percentage of businesses that will always fail. Poor leadership, poor money management, whatever it is. For that 2-year or 3-year period, they made sure that no one failed. So what happens is now that we're post-COVID, those poor businesses have to fail, right? And
it's just a backlog of...
It's just backlog of failures that needed to happen. So for me, I think there's a little bit of that. And I think my personal opinion is they just need to rip the Band-Aid off and go more aggressive, and businesses that should have failed need to just fail quicker, unfortunately, and the economy will recover. But the longer they leave it, and if they put more measures to allow businesses to continue to survive that shouldn't survive, actually insolvent and whatnot, it's going to take longer for us to get into better economic times.
Just pushes it down the road, right? And it brings Abe and I. It's interesting that you say, your customers that are doing well are even looking at their spending, and Abe and I see that on a day-to-day basis. We look at our customers, and we provide some would say a luxury service to some, and essential services to others, and we see our customers that are large and doing really well. Same thing, they're contracting that spend, and it's every little cent. They're trying to put this nest egg away for what's to come in the future. Which, it's good to hear it from you as well. That it's not just us seeing it, but we've been pretty consistent with that over the last few months, and I think that'll continue for a little while longer until we see some stability in the economic space.
All right. Speaking of the future, Andrew, you want to?
Yeah, so I guess
lead the next one.
We've spoken a little bit around budgeting. So Abe and I we did our own podcast previously around budgeting, and we focused specifically on small businesses and gave some templates and things like that. But I'd love some of your insights, Sevan, on, is there anything that you've seen in relation to, what makes an effective budget for small business, or even on the flip side of that, is there things that people exclude from their budget or they don't account for in their budget, which leads to issues in the future?
Yeah, look, the first and foremost, I think anyone that's not doing at least a profit and loss budget in any business is doing themselves a disservice. So it's really, really important to have a budget. And we talk about profit and loss in terms of, you can do budgets, three-way forecasts, three-way budgets, and get all fancy with it. But I think the main thing is when you go down the path of it really creates these juices of thinking. So when you do a budget, you got to figure out you got to first and foremost figure out the past. So all of a sudden you got to assess the past. Okay, well, what was my revenue in different months? What was my expenditure? How did the past go? What went well? And when you do a budget, you need to you can start anywhere, but let's say you start at the top line. Go, okay, what is going to be my revenue goals? So if you want to grow, you're going to need to start putting that in a monthly timeline. So is it going to be a little bit of growth early on and exponential growth later? And all of a sudden, as you start doing this, you go, well, how am I going to get there? What do I need? And then you go down the line of the costs. You'll probably get to, if you're a sell product, you'll start thinking about margins. Should we look? And then you go, shit, my margins aren't high enough. And just doing the exercise, you'll have another piece of paper with hopefully lots of different things you're going to have to do in your business, which might be, how am I going to grow 20%? Do I need to spend more money on marketing? You might start thinking about your sales team and are they performing? So you're thinking about people management. And really, as you go down the line, it makes you start to think about the business from a proactive perspective with a plan in mind. So budgeting isn't boring, can't be stuff doing it. As soon as you get going, it makes the CEO, the director, the person that's in charge start to think strategically and just forces you to do that. And I think if you actually do a budget, the other thing I'd say is a lot of people don't do a budget with someone else that's not in the business. So that's a tip I'd give you. And actually doesn't have to be an expert. It can be someone that's in business, someone with a high IQ that's got some inquisitive nature to themselves. Even if you talk through it, you might say to them, I really don't know what to do with this particular person. They're not performing. There'll be conversations you can have with that person. So I think you just got to do the budget. And to answer your question, Abe, the thing that gets missed out when they do the budget, because people do a big simplistic P&L budget, is a capital expenditure. So what are the CapEx? Because that's not in your P&L. So yes, these are our revenue initiatives and these are going to be our operating expenses. But what assets do we need to buy? What's happening with our assets, whether it's a fleet, whether it's the office environment, whether it's, what other equipment that you have that get your business done. Looking at the assets that make the business work, that needs to be considered in a budget.
And I think, a big thing for us, and because we both work in software, we don't really have to worry about the CapEx too much or really at all. But the thing that really stands out to me is how important budgeting becomes when you have lumpy payments. And so if you have a lot of annual contracts, budgeting is the key to making sure your business can survive and make payroll, right? Because that's the biggest. If you might have a bumper January and have, start of the year, people want to spend money, new initiatives, and you see an influx of cash, and you might get paid 60% or 70% of your revenue in January, but July you get nothing, and you just like, okay, well, you need to budget that out, because otherwise you're going to end up short on payroll, any other expenses that could be coming out in those months.
Yeah, it's a good comment, Abe, because what I talked about before was a P&L budget, which didn't really talk to the cycle of how you get paid and how you pay your suppliers. That's really important. I think you do need to start with the profit and loss. And if you do have cash flow issues or lumpy income, forecasting that on a spreadsheet, that gets complicated. It becomes that three-way forecast when you're looking at timing of cash flow and so on and so forth. But I think then you need to get an expert involved in those type of areas, where you need to then build something out that goes, if I collect my debtor days 10 days earlier, pay out 3 days later, how will that impact my bank account that allows me to then spend that on CapEx? That requires a little bit more, expertise in doing that. But agreed, cash flow forecasting and budgeting is seriously important, especially in these current times.
Especially where it's tight, especially with small businesses, or if you're looking at a 12-month period where every dollar counts, it's going to really impact you. And Teamgate, we're not a big company, but we get 80% of our revenue in January. So if I'm not smart or don't have any plan in place, I see all this cash in January. Great, let's go. We're going to Vegas. We're going to all these conferences.
Let's go
around the world. I'm gonna spend $20,000 on Google Ads. We're in trouble, because that cash isn't going to run through to the end of the year. So something really, I think, when I first moved into the business world from the military, I was clueless with all of this stuff. I did accounting in school, did it in grade 11 and 12, and I loved it, and I did a business degree, but it had been a long time since I'd looked at it. And I think one of the most beneficial exercises, like you said, Sevan, was going through a budget exercise. And Abe took me through it. I was working with Abe on the same company when I first started.
Taught him all the wrong things.
We did a zero-based budget, so we started from scratch, and we just looked at what does revenue look like. But there's little things that back then you wouldn't even think about. It's like, okay, well, we want to grow 3% month over month, but with that growth comes an increased spend in our platform, because we've got to host these extra 3% of customers. It comes an increase. There's going to be a point where we need to hire a sales rep or hire a new person, which that comes with additional expenses, which a lot of people may not budget for when they go through that exercise. So, yeah, I think if you don't have a budget in place, you're crazy. But even if you do have a budget in place, it's worth going through that exercise again and going through it with someone like you said, Sevan, just to get that fresh set of eyes to see if they can pick up anything that you've just completely missed.
Yeah, and I think with services, it's really important that people don't often understand is that there's two ways you increase your income, and Sevan, correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, but there's two ways you increase your income. It's either you increase your prices or you increase the amount of hours that are available. And if you're someone like a personal trainer in a gym and you're a sole trader, well, you've only got one option now, because two options are you either work longer or you charge people more money. And so you just do a supply and demand in that case. If you're an electrician, you then need to look at, well, bringing someone on, hiring an apprentice. I imagine it's the same thing with, your accounting, bookkeeping, budgeting, right? Is that you can only handle so many clients. And once you reach, let's just say the threshold's 20, you then go, I need to hire someone else, because we then need to split up these clients, have 10 each, build up to when they got 20 each, hire someone else, split again.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's where I was talking about when you go down this path, you start thinking of these questions around, how am I going to get there? Is a strategy for growth increasing price and making more hours available by hiring a bigger team and all that? So that's really important. And the terminology, what you want to try to get down to in a budget is some form of goals. Eventually, if you end up having 30 things you get to action, it's just not going to work. So what are your 3 revenue initiatives? What are your 3 cost discussion or cost initiatives? It could be, we are going to go down this digital marketing spend, and that's part of, that expenditure is going to manage that ROI with the revenue growth. What are your expense reduction strategies? Sometimes the larger companies have procurement teams that will look at the fixed costs of the business on a regular basis, to look at reduction. So I think more importantly today in the current environment, do your low hanging fruit. Make sure you're looking after go out to the market on light and power suppliers, gas and utilities. Make sure that all the software stack that you're being used. One of the biggest expense items that has grown over the years is a subscription line for most businesses. To the point where, and look, you guys are a subscription business. All businesses need to assess, because what happens is we get subscription-based businesses is $10 a month, $20 a month. They're small subscriptions, and people get in them, they try them, but they forget to turn them off. So I think as part of the budgeting process is look at, is this cost giving us a return on investment across the whole board? And that's sort of another tip I can give when you're going through that process.
Yeah. And yes, we are a subscription-based business, but I think it's important on a personal level. Like, how many times have you checked your own bank account, you're like, oh, geez, I've got Spotify, Apple Music, all these things that I don't use that are just chilling away.
Like, it's my biggest pet peeve is when I hear people who like have Spotify and Apple Music and
five streaming services.
Five streaming services, and it's like, you don't have time to watch all 5 streaming services, so I don't know why you've got them for family to leech off. But I mean, let's move on to bookkeeping, and I think it's important for our listeners. Most people understand what a budget is, but it'd be great to get a line in the sand of what's bookkeeping and what's budgeting. What's the difference?
Yeah, look, budgeting is you're putting pen to paper of what you want something to be. So what you want your revenue to be in July, or what you want your expenses to be, or what you think they're going to be. Bookkeeping is recording what has actually happened. So when your suppliers start throwing your invoices out to you, when you go to do your payroll, it's actually collating what's actually happening in the business and doing it in an accurate, timely manner. Bookkeeping, some businesses use bookkeeping just to do their compliance. I hire a bookkeeper to do my BAS, which is your business activity statement, to lodge your GST. I'd hire a bookkeeper so that my accountant doesn't charge me a lot of money when he does my tax return. They are unsophisticated thinking, probably very small businesses that think like that. Bookkeeping is very important because a good bookkeeper starts to think about things like chart of accounts. How are we going to categorize the P&L? Are we going to put them in different line items, direct costs versus fixed costs? You can look at your people and segregate them between admin staff, people that work. So good bookkeeper doesn't just record. There's a science, or there's an element of creativity that you put together that allows management to then make decisions on numbers. So budgeting is bookkeepers, accountants, business owners should work out what they want to achieve. And as the years go on, or as the month is progressing, as the season continues, the accurate reporting of what's going on in the way that you've set your budget up and being able to analyze how you're progressing is the most important part. If your records are poor, we have this saying, and could have used this quote: you can't manage what you can't see. And if you can't see it, and the bookkeeping is terrible and it's not accurate, it's not timely, well, how the hell are you going to manage it? And what's the point of doing a budget if you're not going to look at it? So that's my little take on what bookkeeping is.
And the thing that I see with a lot of bookkeeping nowadays, Sevan, is that it gets offshored because it's not, I guess there's not a lot of regulatory stuff around it as long as you have it. But I know that there's also risks that are involved with offshoring things like bookkeeping. I know it's a service that you offer, but what are your advice when a business owner is weighing up? Do I get someone locally in there? Almost every town has a local bookkeeper that does bookkeeping, or do I go something that might be half the price and offshored? What's your advice to people generally surrounding that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I'll probably take you through a journey of how this happens for most businesses. So startup level, you find that money is generally, limited. So business owners tend to either, get their spouses or themselves to do the bookkeeping themselves. I actually don't discourage this because it allows the business owner in a small business that might have a very small team to actually get to know the numbers and understand the process. But it's the lowest value work, and that's the easiest one, not to outsource, but to bring expert in very quickly. I think there are a lot of good Australian bookkeepers. So the next evolution is, well, I don't want to do it myself, but I can't hire a full-time person, so I'll hire a bookkeeper. They'll charge me 10 hours a week, 5 hours a week, and it evolves. That cost will grow as the business grows. My view is I don't have an issue with offshoring. I think that's completely fine. When you go offshoring, they'll probably, and if you pick a really good company and so on and so forth, they'll probably do the low-hanging fruit really well. They'll put your data in accurately. If you create the right systems, you manage them well, that'll go in there right. But really good bookkeepers do more than that. And they'll actually help you analyze, run reports, make you aware of trends or things that they see as they are doing the bookkeeping. So my view is businesses...
Like, hey, you've got 5 video streaming services.
Yeah, or Abe, you've hired 3 new staff, but I would have expected your revenue to have grown by now. Why did you hire 3 staff if their revenue wasn't going to grow? And you may know this, Abe, that's happening in your business because you're not silly. You know your revenue's not growing, but then you may not know how badly it's impacting your cash flow or profit. So my view is outsource it as quickly as you can because your time is better spent doing something else. But make sure it has to be timely, it has to be accurate. And when you actually print the reports, if you can't read it or you can't engage with someone that can help you analyze and read, you've probably got the wrong person. So it's not an expensive cost. I think you just got to get it right. You got to get it done right. And I would probably start with an Australian bookkeeper internally first, so that at least the core base is done well. And if you've got the systems and processes and you do it well, maybe offshoring a really good processor will work. If you're early in the journey and it's a little bit broken, a lot of creativity needs to go into it and set up, offshoring it at that point, the intellect may not come in or their role is not that, so all of a sudden it doesn't work. So maybe timing of offshore is important, but there's plenty of great bookkeepers in the Australian market that can support.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the local. I think for small business owners who maybe don't have that financial acumen that's been developed just yet, getting a local bookkeeper who knows what they're doing, does it for multiple businesses around town, and you have that ability to go in and face-to-face. And I've seen it work really effectively where someone goes, hey, I want to buy this. Can I buy it? And the bookkeeper's like, you have enough cash flow to support that capital expenditure. I don't think you'll be able to afford it unless you grow your business by X amount. And I think that's what you're talking about with the analysis, right? Is like they keep you honest when you have this idea. I think it was Andrew's, thing there where the quote that you had, Andrew, around, your budget tells you what you can't afford, but it doesn't stop you from buying it. So when that tradie's like, I want that new Ford Ranger, goes to the bookkeeper and says, hey, I'm going to buy a Ford Ranger. They're like, no, you're not, buddy.
I love that you said Ford Ranger is the most purchased asset for tradies.
Because I see 20 of them parked outside the pub on a Friday lunchtime.
That's all the electricians. That's all the electricians.
No, they're driving Rams, the electricians.
Yeah,
now.
that's true. That's true.
That is funny. But the other thing that I'd say with bookkeepers, just because you've outsourced it to an expert that is a contractor and that is meant to be the expert, I would say you need to treat them like an employee. So don't go hire a lawyer and an accountant and you don't need to manage them. So when you hire an accountant, a lawyer, or a plumber to fix your plumbing, you're not managing that relationship because they're professionals. I'm not saying bookkeepers aren't professionals, but when you hire a bookkeeper, don't go, oh, you're the bookkeeper, just do it. I think you need to manage them like an employee. This is the goals. You got to review them regularly. I would just pretend they are an employee. You need to lead what you want from them and manage them like an employee. If you just go, oh, you're the bookkeeper, can you do my books? And you haven't picked the right person, the wrong person's driving the wrong agenda. So it's important to treat them like an employee in a positive sense. They review them, lead them, train them, set expectations, make them accountable, all of that stuff. You drive it. Otherwise, you'll get poor results.
For sure. And I think Abe and I have both experienced bad bookkeeping as well. We've seen bad bookkeepers, we've seen good bookkeepers. And I think it comes back, like you said, in the early stages, if it's a startup or a small business and they're managing the financials themselves, I think it is important to have that financial acumen. Go and educate yourself, whether even if it's just like a zero course or the ability to know how to pull reports from your accounting software, because then you can go and do a fact check. That's what bookkeeping is essentially. You come up with the plan with your budget, but the bookkeeping is all right. You've said that you're going to spend $30,000 a month on X, but in June you've spent 42. Why? Be able to go and actually pinpoint that. And, if your bookkeeper's not raising it to you, then you need to take that to your bookkeeper and say, hey, we've had this extra expense here. What is it? Why? Did we expect it? Why didn't we expect it? And then adjust your budget to suit if you need to. So, unfortunately, Abe and I have seen some bad bookkeepers, some good bookkeepers, but you wouldn't know the difference if you didn't have that little bit of financial acumen behind you. So, hold them to account.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good advice of start by doing your own books, and then as you expand that to someone else, because I think that's a really good process. And Andrew and I are heavily involved in our books, so in our business, so we understand where every dollar is going, and you see the people who don't understand that, and it's quite funny when you say, like, what are you spending that on? They're like, I don't know what's in there. And like Andrew and I could pretty much list off, and like if we have a software expense, we'll be able to list off like sales software, this is what we're using, and we'll be able to list off like, we're using Teamgate, we're using Grain, we're using Zoom, and that'd be our sales expenses. We'll be able to list that off, no worries. But other people really struggle with that. But then with that in mind, if I was a small business owner and I want to get my books under control and I really should get onto that, are there any tools or subscription services that you might recommend for someone to look at when they're starting out? Or should they just get a Google sheet or an Excel sheet and just start plugging numbers in?
Look, to be honest with you, I think we're a Xero fan, so we do promote. Well, I said promote. We do encourage our business clients to use Xero. But if you're just a Jim's mowing, you're an electrician, you're on your own, you're not going to have super amounts of transactions. You can do that on a Google sheet or an Excel document. I would encourage you to get an accountant or a bookkeeper to help you set it up. It's set up well and all the formulas are done. Something like that has Excel. But if you're ambitious and you want to grow, start properly. So go on to Xero. There's subscriptions at the lower level and you can grow it. Cloud-based subscription allows you to then bolt on other things, CRM packages, reporting software. So you can it's an open API. There's lots of add-ons to cloud-based software like that. So for me, I think definitely start with something that is on the cloud, get it done right, and then it'll allow you to open up to what the world of, those SaaS providers have. So an example of the tradie might be, it's really hard to implement ServiceMate or Arrow, who are some of the two providers that provide, sort of a job management and workflow management to the industry, if you don't have Xero or the accounting side isn't integrated. So I think my advice would be definitely start with Xero. Tradies, I like ServiceMate and Arrowflow. I think of the business as if it's big and apply your software stack like you're a big company. Because if you get the foundations, like how hard is it to implement Teamgate to a big client that's got thousands of clients than it would be to a startup that starts the journey? You guys be like, awesome, we will make sure this is going to be the best onboarding and success because you've come in early. Whereas if I've used HubSpot, Keep, an accounting package, blah, 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 MailChimp here and this and that, to bring on another CRM at that point, shit. It's hard, it's difficult. So I think do the best that you can afford and think, if you want to be a $3 million business in 3 years, apply what they would have applied 3 years ago, because SaaS is not expensive.
Yeah, and I think that's why, the pricing scales per users, per contacts and things like that is so you can start, no longer is it you have to buy the $5,000, disc that you install on your computer, because that's what it is, and you can have all these user licenses and things like that. Arguably, when you get bigger, it becomes more expensive because they are able to crank up the price a lot more. But for small businesses, it allows you to get access to that so much easier.
And I do believe in customer experience, and every business has an end user stakeholder. Look at software outside of this budgeting, bookkeeping that we're talking about. how do we, how do you communicate to your clients? You haven't, I think that part of the software stack is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. That's, I think, in the interest of time, let's move forward to tax. And one thing that I'd love to know about tax is where you see small businesses, I guess, failing at tax, and they come to you and say, Sevan, I'm in a hole. It's like, and I know there's a few things out there, like it might have been like pay-as-you-go tax that they missed, or they didn't pay super, and then suddenly the government's like, hey, mate, where's all this money you owe us for, or you owe these people for super? Yeah. Things like that. Like, where are the pitfalls that you see people come to you and say, help?
Well, I'll tell you the reason it happens, and I don't know if anyone's told you why it happens. It's about education, da 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 da. But the reason most of the time it happens is, think of super. Do you ever get an invoice to pay your super bill, or do you ever get an invoice to pay your GST, or an invoice to pay your PAYG tax installment, or even your income tax? Generally what happens, you don't get those invoices, and you don't choose to acquire that cost, right? You don't choose to go and buy that iPhone or order that product. So it's sort of this invisible liability that creeps up on businesses, right? And even if you told me today, like, we at Alexander Spencer, we have to lodge our June BAS on the 25th of August. I have an idea of what that bill is. Now, we manage our money quite well, so I don't have cash flow issues. So I don't. No, we do at times, and we've got a great bank and facilities, but I don't have a cash flow issue, so I don't need to worry about that. But I wouldn't have a clue what that BAS is going to be. I have an idea. So what happens is, because I haven't audited it, that's what happens. It creeps up on business owners. So I think that's step one. So, and there are tools. A good bookkeeper, as they're doing their bookkeeping, should tell you your superannuation liability is now at 10 grand. Because what happens is, they see the net pay coming out, they forget about the tax withholding in the super, and I think they're going well. And if you're managing your money on a bank account, and your bank account goes 50 grand, 60 grand, and they're like, oh yeah, I've got to pay that supplier and that account. Generally, business owners forget the super and the PAYG withholding and the GST. And the other reason that we see a lot of issues with tax, and I'll use the restaurant industry as an example. So what happens is, GST is a killer. GST and tax withholding. What happens is, in a restaurant, every single line item, there's GST collected. So if they do $1 million, $1.1 million turnover, 100 grand is not their money. All right, that's 100 grand is not their money. What then happens is, in their wages, which is a big part of a restaurant P&L, a good 30% of the cost of the wage gets paid quarterly or monthly, but generally quarterly if they're generally small. They pay their wages, net wages, to all their staff. Then they've got to pay the tax withheld every 3 months. It's quite lumpy. Then what happens is, the GST credits, they don't get any credits for 90% of their suppliers, because they buy tomatoes, they buy meat, they buy veggies, they buy all of these things that don't attract GST. So they have the 100 grand that they've got to give. There's not a lot of credits that come off that 100 grand. And a lot of the other GST credits is linked into wages, which has no GST credits, right?
So they get absolutely smacked twice with the wages and the lack of GST credits.
So lack of GST credits on nearly everything on their P&L. They've got 100 grand GST. Let's say they've got an 80 grand GST bill. They've got this tax withheld. They've got super. But when they're running their business, they're so cash flow positive, they get in this trap of, oh, we're doing really well. But if they looked at their P&L, they're probably losing money. So you could lose money and have a GST bill, a PAYG withholding bill, and a work cover bill. So a lot of my catered startups will come to me going, there's no point being in business because all I'm doing is paying GST and PAYG withholding that. I'm like, but when you hired that person and you paid him 100 grand, you've only so far given him 70. You've got to give the other 30 to the government. You chose to hire that person for 100 grand. But what happens is, I'm going to swear, it's not fucking worth being a business owner because all I'm doing is paying tax. You're not. All you're doing is you've committed to paying someone 100 grand. It's just the way you pay them. You're unsophisticated in the understanding of it. So
it's like when people say, they get taxed heavily on overtime. And it's like, why are they taxing me so much on overtime? It's like, no. That's just like, you're just paying your cent per dollar rate on tax.
Correct.
Like, they're not whacking you more.
100%. And that's why the reason a lot of people fail in the first 5 years of business, not a lot, but a big chunk of it is not understanding the bookkeeping, the budgeting, the planning, not getting the right bookkeeper at the right time, not actually taking the time to learn how tax works, and it goes to the shit. And that's why a lot of construction companies go into liquidation, because they don't pay the tax withheld, they delay on super, blah blah blah. They use other people's money. It's robbing Paul to pay Peter. It's just a pain in the bum. But good accounting, good bookkeeping solves that.
I'm glad you said, one of the biggest issues is not getting the right bookkeeping at the right time. There is 1,000 services out there for financials, right? And just as part of your introduction, Sevan, just with Alexander Spencer, you guys offer a bunch of different services. So for a small business out there that might not have a clue of what to look for, with all the services out there, what should they be looking at and when, I guess?
Yeah.
So with bookkeeping, with financial planning, with accounting, what should they look at and when?
Do you want to know the answer for a startup or for a business that's sort of more in their sort of gone through infancy, now they're going to growth phase?
I guess the question, we probably have different definitions of what a startup is versus someone going into growth, right?
I think anyone that's genuinely want to start a business, the first hire has to be an accountant, because you need to get your structures right. Is it a trust company? You need to get educated around the income tax and how tax works, GST, PAYG. So I think you need to find a trusted advisor, an accountant. I haven't had the need to find one myself. I think asking other successful business owners that you aspire, asking and finding out who they use, blah, 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 get to the right. A good accountant, depending on how good they are, you need to drive that relationship. So one of the things you need to do is ask these questions around bookkeeping, tax, They will help you along the journey, but you gotta ask for it. You gotta be inquisitive. So the advice I give listeners that are in business is, just because you've hired an accountant doesn't mean they're just going to do you expect them to do. I hear from clients that are he never rings me, or he doesn't know. I'm like, did you tell him that your revenue declined in the last 3 months? He's got thousands of clients. The relationship goes both ways. So I think you need to there's a lot of onus on the business owner to keep the accountant accountable, but at the same time, you start with the accountant. But then use them as a coach, use them as your finance coach, and be inquisitive around the business. Create. A lot of accountants give their time up for free. You would probably not agree with that, but we do. Try to have regular check-ins. They're not going to charge you for the 5-10 minute phone call. Build a relationship with them, talk to them, and they will guide you. And that's how we do it. That's why we built these other businesses. So at the right moment, they come in and fill those voids. So, but really, earlier the better. The later you leave it, the costs go up, because they've got to fix messes and stuff like that. So that's what I'd say. So earlier the better. Start with the accountant, and if you don't, the other thing I'd say is if you don't have a rapport and you don't gel with them, move on, even if they're a good accountant. I think you'd have a really good rapport. If you can't pick up the phone and feel like you can call him, you've got the wrong person.
Yeah, it's like with employees, right? If you've got a meeting scheduled with them or a call scheduled with them, and you're dreading going through that, then it's not a fit, right?
No, agreed.
And you raise a good point around rapport. Is there anything else, like, let's say I'm a small business, I'm looking for an accountant. Is there any sort of qualification questions or anything to look out for? In our business, there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. Is there anything to avoid, anything to look for in particular?
Yeah, I think the way that I would approach it is really get the scope right. So talk about understanding the scope, really what that looks like. So because their services are so broad, really get what you want and what they provide right. I think that's really important. I think you need to ask questions around things that you're worried about, problems or concerns that you have, and ask it in a way is, how would you solve this for me if I had this problem? I'm worried about taxes. What's your opinion? A bit like how you asked me, what's your opinion on what can go wrong? And just see how creative they are, how engaged they are in their response. Are they giving you one-line answers, or are they going deep in and taking you to a journey and go, oh, look, let me open a spreadsheet and show you how it works, or we did this for this client. I think when you're interviewing someone, interview them like a job interview, and you can tell if they're interested or not. But ask them, if I had this scenario, how would you approach it? Or let's say you want to buy a house in the future. Say, like, if I had to buy a house, what advice would you give me? So you kind of doing an interview, it's like hosting a podcast. You just kind of want to see their engagement. You want to give them an opportunity to give you some advice as well. So if you had a prior accountant that made a mistake, tell them the scenario and say, oh, how would, and don't tell them they made a mistake, but say, how would you approach this? How your firm would approach this? So I think if you get all that right, good testimonials, you've been referred, unfortunately, you can't touch it, feel it, look at it to buy it. Being a service, you just got to trust the process and dive in. But if it's not working, you need to move. And the other thing I'd say is the first 6 months of the journey can have its ups and downs. So I'd probably give it a chance, give it at least a year or at least one whole cycle before you make the call that it is the right person. Because onboarding a new client, especially if it's a client that's been around for a while, the accountant has to take time to get to know you, and just look for the effort. If the effort's there, but there's some things that have been dropped, it's okay, because generally it's common in an onboarding process as you get to know the accountant.
Yeah, and I think one of the really key bits that you said earlier, Sevan, is that the talk to someone who you trust in the business world or who you've had dealings with and say, like, hey, who do you use? Are they good? And if you generally get along with them and you have similar sort of viewpoints towards things, then I would say that's where I would start when I'll be looking for it. And I think that's probably says a lot about the buyer's journey that comes with it. So, but I know that we are up on time, and I want to be conscious of that. And so I really appreciate you coming on today, Sevan, and for being so open with everything, going through your story. And once again, amazing since 1999 with the one company. It's a massive praise there, and working all the way up to partner, which is fantastic. I mean, your knowledge in this area is incredible, and hopefully the listeners got something out of it. But if they want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
Yeah, I have a unique name. So Sevan, the surname is Tuna. I like the fish. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, I will pop up pretty easily. So you can definitely look me up on LinkedIn. A Google search will get you pretty close. But it's alexanderspencer.com.au. And just ping me somewhere there, and I'd love to have a chat.
Yeah, and if they like what you're spruiking, the podcast is The Bottom Line, yeah?
The Bottom Line, and you can get it in all listening channels, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so on. So yeah, very similar to you guys. We talk to a lot of business owners, and yeah, just love chatting to people. So it's good fun.
Yeah, awesome. So go give them a follow and listen into some of Sevan's conversations over there if this piques your interest. But you can find us at Beers and Business Pod, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Andrew's on there creating some good videos. He's getting like 5 views or something like that. Yeah. And also YouTube. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts, and that's Biz and Business Pod. Also, 10 a.m. Tuesdays episodes will be launched. So tune in next week for the next episode. And thank you so much, Sevan. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I don't get to be a guest often. So I really enjoyed this moment. And Andrew, thank you for thinking of me for coming on the show. And Abe, it's been a pleasure to meet you. And I've loved the conversation. Enjoy the rest of your day and keep cranking those beers.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.